The extraordinary call from a country's top politician: kill drug addicts and you'll not be prosecuted. We'll look into the Philippine approach to controlling the drug trade, and a call for better data about the lives of young women. How can you address a lack of opportunity and equality unless you find out what's happening right now? I'm Martin Stanford. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. More than 7,000 islands make up the Philippines, but the bulk of its fast-growing population lives on just 11 of them. Controversial politician Rodrigo Duterte was sworn in as the country's 16th president in June 2016. A former mayor of Davao City won a landslide victory at the polls, with his election campaign focused almost entirely on crime, drug abuse and corruption. To date, more than 3,500 alleged drug dealers and addicts have been killed, about a third of them in police operations, but the majority by armed vigilante militias. Duterte has publicly encouraged civilians to kill addicts and said he will not prosecute police for extrajudicial executions. Insight's Dana Lewis can tell us more.
In Dagupan City, north of Manila, monsoon floodwaters a minor event compared to this. The funeral for 5-year-old Danica May Garcia. A little girl cut down by a stray bullet that was meant for her grandfather. A tragic casualty of death squads let off the leash by the country's new president. Elected in May, President Rodrigo Duterte has been nicknamed the Punisher. He's popular because of his promises to clean up drugs in the Philippines, and bizarrely has now compared himself to Hitler and the Holocaust.
Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now, there's a 3 million drug addicts. There are. I'd be happy to slaughter them.
In fact, there were 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Jewish groups have called Duterte's rhetoric disgusting. And human rights groups say there are only roughly 2 million drug users in the Philippines, just under 2% of the population.
Declaring a war on drugs and then deciding and calling, basically a turkey shoot against anyone who's suspected of being a drug user or a drug dealer is an absolute failure of governance. It could be actually described better as a war on the poor.
In just over 3 months, more than 2,000 people have been gunned down, almost half by the police. The rest by gunmen acting with Duterte's blessing. His police have not only drawn up kill lists, but in his inauguration speech, the new president told citizens, if you know any drug addicts, call us, or go ahead and kill them yourself. And they have. Night after night, bodies have piled up in the streets. Duterte has responded in vulgar language to criticisms leveled by the U.S. and the United Nations. And one such rant led to the White House canceling bilateral meetings planned between the two countries last month.
I am a president of a sovereign state, and we have long ceased to be a colony. I do not have any master except the Filipino people. Nobody but nobody. You must be respectful. Do not just throw away questions and statements.
The trigger for Duterte was the American call for due process.
We recognize the significant burden that the drug trade plays not just in the Philippines but around the world, and fighting narco trafficking is tough. But we will always assert the need to have due process.
And now the Punisher has announced he is canceling decades-old military cooperation with the United States and instead will strengthen ties with Russia and China.
I would serve notice to you now that this will be the last military exercise. Jointly, Philippines, US, the last one.
Philippine prisons have suddenly become overrun with alleged drug users and dealers. Anyone on kill lists have turned themselves in to escape death squads and the police, who under Duterte have a license to shoot on sight. But in the Philippines, turning yourself in might also be suicide.
They get photographed, they get their addresses taken down, and 2 or 3 days later, unidentified gunmen show up at their homes and kill them or try to kill them. So there seems to be collusion, at the very least, between the people who hold these lists at the police and local government level and these unidentified gunmen.
The drama of speaking out against the bloodshed is frightening. While Duterte is popular, many Filipinos who have had family members killed have in the shadows of candlelight vigils demanded an end to what they have labeled the madness. Others, frightened of becoming targets themselves, have only agreed to speak out to a Senate hearing on the drug war partially disguised.
The momentum that the police has gained must not...
This senator, who is Duterte's harshest critic, has in turn been accused of working for the drug cartels, an allegation she calls garbage.
Senator Lacson said...
And this self-confessed hitman told the hearing not only had he been ordered by Duterte to kill the senator, but alleged Duterte ordered the murders of political opponents when he was mayor.
There's an average of 36 extrajudicial killings in the Philippines each day. In April, before he became president, Duterte had already boasted, when he was mayor of Davao, that 1,700 suspected criminals had been killed by death squads. And he said he would pardon himself for the crimes of multiple murders if voted into the nation's highest office.
To avoid the street violence, Filipinos have signed up in droves for rehabilitation. But the Philippines has drug problems that are very close to American levels, in fact. And the use of amphetamines is lower than Australia, for example. Critics say Duterte's contention that drugs threaten the very existence of the nation seem as questionable as his brutal methods to eliminate them. I'm Dana Lewis, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined in the studio by Leah Borromeo, who's a journalist and filmmaker, and by Skype by the journalist and author Jonathan Steele. Jonathan, where's this drugs policy going to go?
Well, it seems to be going to go on full blast. There's no sign that Duterte is going to stop it, in spite of the international criticism and, as your clip showed, internal domestic criticism as well from ordinary people in the street. He seems to be absolutely convinced he's on the right track. He boasts about the number of people who've been killed in the last 3 months, and there's no sign that he's going to stop.
And the voices of opposition, internally or externally, having no effect on him? I mean, he's empowered as a newly elected president. I suppose he doesn't care, does he?
No, I think the opinion polls, such as they are, still seem to show that he's very popular. And so these minority issues, the protests that you see domestically on the streets of Manila and other cities.
Leah Borromeo, from your understanding of the reaction to this, there must be some parts of the society that are quite shocked at the sheer brutality of it.
Well, some parts of the society that are shocked are usually the ones either in the wider diaspora, so within the international community, or those who basically didn't vote him in. As Jonathan mentioned earlier, it is a case of, it does seem widely popular because drugs have been made to appear as the one issue that needs to be sorted. Criminality is one issue that needs to be sorted, and the only way to do it is to have a firm hand. There's a sort of tight sort of Filipino sense that, you must discipline the child. I mean, this is a country where sort of corporal punishment with children is still seen as reasonably acceptable. So when you're talking about dissenting voices, you're talking about dissenting voices that a lot of people wouldn't not necessarily assume to be, shall we say, of the people. It comes from an elite. It comes from a much more educated sort of sector of society. And anything to do with international communities, a lot of his cronies, particularly because there's now a kind of triumvirate from Mindanao, where Duterte is actually from, who run the government. They all just say to him, though, these are these people. They're not our people.
I know it's early days. He was only elected in June, but any sign that it's working? Are people being turned away from the drug trade or drug usage because of these extreme measures?
Statistics aren't necessarily that clear now, and nor were they that clear before in terms of usage as well. You do have certain sort of monitors from human rights groups, and you have certain monitors as to who goes in and out of jails. I mean, this is a country where you also used to have the death penalty for drugs offenses anyway at one point, but now it's the fact that there are extrajudicial killings and people are actually, given this sort of license to take out vigilante action, regardless of any evidence or any proof of any kind of system of justice. It's just, I suspect you of doing this. Then, so in terms of the statistics we have for that, I think that's terribly unclear whether it's working. But then it worked in Davao because a lot of people were just run scared. But what actually happens in Davao, and what happened with the town where he was mayor, what happens there is that a lot of it was just rushed even further and further underground. And that's one of the bigger problems that you might have to deal with.
And Jonathan Steele, I mean, if you allow, nay, encourage this kind of lawlessness, this free hand of vigilantes to mete out what they see as justice in the drugs zone, then surely it will just expand to other areas of life too.
Well, and it will expand to other areas of criminality too. I mean, what seems to be happening, some of the people who are being killed and targeted by these death squads are people who are informers, who are trying to sort of bring, in some way, the police to bear on the real people who are the sort of drug kings, the drug mafias. So now the informers are all being killed under the cover that they were themselves somehow dealers or whatever, the smear that is attached to them. And so it makes it much easier for the criminal gangs to expand and develop.
He's going his own way externally too, isn't he? We've had the insult of President Obama. We've had another thing, as we are recording this, a further distancing of himself from Washington, saying, actually, Russia and China are my friends now. In fact, I'm off to Beijing in a fortnight. Is there some real shift of alliances going on here?
Well, there may be. I mean, don't forget that, some years back, there were two huge US bases on the Philippines, which the government of the time asked to have removed. And so this is a sort of endemic streak of nationalism in the Philippines. They feel that they were a colony of Spain, then they became a colony of the United States. And so that sort of feeling that we need independence and the US is the big enemy has been going on for decades. But you're right to say that they're now, the leadership, Duterte, is now turning towards Russia. And for China, this is amazing, because it's not so long ago that the Philippines was on the wrong side of the Chinese goodwill because of the dispute over disputed islands in the seas off the Philippines. So it's amazing that Duterte is now about to make a huge visit to Beijing with a lot of businessmen and so on. The Chinese are welcoming him with open arms, whereas before they, just a few weeks ago, they were treating him as an enemy.
Leo, the idea of America giving up all its... They're doing war games, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
So in one sense, these two countries are collaborating. In another sense, they seem to be having at least a war of words at presidential level. The idea the Americans are going to desert the bases at the Philippines with all their strategic significance, well, I think you agree with me, it's laughable, isn't it?
It absolutely laughable. And again, as Jonathan mentioned there, they were playing war games there. I mean, this is one of the things that China in itself is actually actively trying to seek more and more land and is encroaching into more and more sort of sea waters and sort of who owns what, to the point where they were going to come to some serious blows at one point, very under the previous administration. So now that Duterte is saying, oh yeah, by the way, now these are now my cousins and my Ezi Bezi and my brothers, it is just gobsmacking, absolutely gobsmacking. And now there's a kind of feeling that essentially that he's kind of competing with Donald Trump to be sort of the most vilified man in international politics.
Yeah, he is a president, though. Trump, not yet.
Not yet,
No.
but that's what's giving Trump hope.
Well, that'll be a conversation for another day. Leo Borromeo and Jonathan Steele, thank you both. This is Insight. Coming up, the missing data leaving girls around the world vulnerable and forgotten.